Welcome back. I'm talking to Neil Sanders about how drugs are used, he would allege, to control society. Now, if we just take a step back from it for a moment, Neil, and consider what drugs are, a lot of them grow naturally on the planet, and this was a point that Bill Hicks used to make.
Why is marijuana against the law? It grows naturally upon our planet. Doesn't the idea of making nature against the law seem to you a bit paranoid? To make marijuana against the law is like saying God made a mistake.
You know, we've got alcohol, which is allowed, we've got tobacco, which is allowed, both which are naturally occurring, and then we've got some drugs which are naturally occurring which aren't allowed. So we've got a whole array of different chemicals we can put in our bodies that our governments have decided that those ones are bad, you're not going to use those, these ones are allowed. The ones that are allowed, you think are kind of pacifying the public in a way, like alcohol and tobacco, they're not really going to stimulate people mentally, whereas other drugs might.
Yes, yes, to an extent. However, I'm not one of these people that go for the sort of, you take acid once and suddenly you become enlightened and stuff like that. I know a lot of people that take a lot of acid, and a lot of them were pricks before they took it, and they're still like that afterwards. So, you know, it's not drugs per se, it's a substance. They're not an immediate channel into, you know,
higher consciousness.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that would do that. I have no problem with them, but I don't think that they're basically, you know.
Some people will contend that, sort of Terence McKenna, for example, he would say that he has had altered states of consciousness which could not be achieved without the use of narcotics.
Yeah, he's absolutely right.
And that they were real experiences. They weren't hallucinations, or he was connecting to something which he couldn't reach otherwise, this kind of thing.
Yeah, very
you going
possibly.
on with that?
Yeah, with some things, but I think it very much depends on the person, the drug, and the scenario. I don't think there is a go-to. As I say, I don't think LSD is the path to enlightenment for everybody. I don't think that, but in the same way that some people are fine on a couple of drinks, some people turn into raging, you know, bores, basically.
So just to ask your opinion on this, then, would you legalise all drugs and then just tax them a bit, or what would you do? Because I think I would be of that mind.
Yeah, I would be of that mind.
Who is a government to tell you what you can and can't do to your own body? That's the way I would look at it.
Yeah, I'd look at it like that as well, but also purely because, not because I feel that there's any sort of like transcendental sort of enlightenment path for humanity on a whole, although I feel that can happen, but purely because the whole point of drugs is for this social control, and you know, the circumstances exist where people feel that they want to use these sorts of things. Like people say, you know what, if you didn't want to get arrested for drugs, don't take drugs. And so you're absolutely right. I wish I was as happy as you. I wish I wasn't in the circumstances whereby you felt, because a lot of people do. People don't do it just, you know, to spite everybody else. They do it either because it's fun or because they feel that they wish to have an escape from the broader social conditions. If everybody was 100% happy, there would be no need for escape, would there? But that's too broad. We don't want to talk about that. Let's just blame them for shoving that stuff in their veins and put them in prison.
But to get back onto the point that you're making, and that is that I often think of government as having two arms. The visible government, the Obama, the Cameron that we see, and then there's the hidden. It's a bit like the jab and the right hook.
Absolutely, it's a problem. It's a created problem that's created by the governments as a distraction, as a sluice. Basically, this is a way of blaming all your ills on society. I mean, it's tied in basically with the concept of the prison industrial complex. The prison industrial complex is a system situated at the intersection of government and private interests. It uses prisons as a solution to social, political and economic problems. It includes human rights violations, slave labour, policing, courts, the media and the elimination of dissent. And one of the tools that is used in this system, this perpetuated system, is the flooding of particularly poor areas with drugs. And then again, look at the sort of
because
response.
And just to interrupt you there, and you're saying it's because they're not doing anything of any great use. People who live in certain areas, or that is how the officialdom would see them. Let's get them in prison and they can make circuit boards for Lockheed Martin.
Exactly. Once you're in prison.
But do you know if that happens in the UK, Neil?
Well, I don't know if it is.
Are people doing jobs in
Yeah,
prisons?
people do jobs in prisons, and they're all privately owned. I don't know specifically what it is. I know that in America they've got contracts with places like Lockheed Martin and Boeing. And I know that they make army military uniforms and bulletproof vests. And so this is the strange thing. So the prison industrial complex is this huge industry. So it's politically beneficial for you to have a prison because basically you're driving down unemployment, you're seen as being hard on crime, you're getting all these different disparate industries that are coming in and sort of spreading out like a spider's web. And you're showing that you're a good corporate citizen.
We've got Group 4 in the UK. They seem to be running a lot of this private security. And are they running prisons?
They run in prisons, they run in airport security, they also run certain power grids as well. They're one of these, and Leicester Police Force, I believe, they've got a hand in as well. But yes, this is the point. This is a private industry that says that it's doing a public service, and in actual fact what it's doing is it's utilising these people, providing this military industrial complex with a workforce that they don't have to pay taxes on. It's essentially like a slave labour. Also, look at the way that they treat poor people as the way as opposed to the way that they treat somebody like a celebrity, like Nigella Lawson's doing cocaine or something like that. But it's all right, we understand that. But if some sort of
did Nigella Lawson do cocaine?
Yeah, she did it. She admitted to it. But basically, it was just because she was upset. Perfectly legitimate. I mean, you could make the argument that that lad that was,
maybe she put it in one of her pies.
Well, maybe she did. Maybe you could make the same argument that that poor lad that's doing it, he's just doing it because he's upset as well. But no, that's all right because it's framed in a particularly different way.
See, I think a lot of people would say, well, it's against the law, therefore they need to be punished. They need to be put in prison. But you would say I
would say that it's not equal across the board. I'd suggest, depending on your position in society, whether you're a celebrity or a politician or whatever, then why is George Bush not in prison? George Bush is an admitted ex-cocaine addict.
And the other thing that you would contend is that particularly the CIA are fueling the drug use. But would you say it's the same in the UK? I've recently spoken to a chap whose son, well, he alleges was murdered, and he's in trying to get justice for his son. He's uncovered the murders of 5 other young men who were sort of on the fringes or knew about certain drug crime in London. Now, it appears from that there are a lot of corrupt police officers in the UK who are profiting from drug crime in the UK, and that goes to a very high level within the British police force, perhaps to Deputy Chief Constable, he alleges. So, but do you think it goes right to the top, or do you think it's just the fact that the drug lords have compromised a large number of police officers?
I know that Howard Marks had, who was a marijuana importer, had a lot of connections with MI5, MI6, the Mafia and certain other terrorist organisations, which seems very, very strange. But the point is that basically the drugs often come from a war scenario, Vietnam War, increase in the Golden Triangle, increase in heroin in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
To use a quote from a film, ain't no poppy fields in Harlem. Nobody in South Central owns a plane. Nobody, they don't have these huge amounts of infrastructure. You could look at other.
So it's got to get there somehow.
Yeah.
And to get it there requires quite a comprehensive logistical operation.
Yeah.
All right. So let's come on to the Iran-Contra, because that fits in nicely with this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this was a war between Iran and Iraq.
Yes.
Just take it from there, Neil.
Well, that was basically. I mean, Iran and Iraq were fighting, and basically there was a weapons embargo against Iran, so it was illegal to sell the weapons. But Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and through a conduit called Oliver North, them and certain members of the Israeli government decided that they wanted to actually supply Iran with weapons.
So who's imposed the ban on weapon sales to Iran?
I think it was an international embargo.
So maybe UN or something like that.
Yeah, violations.
But were the US supplying weapons to Iraq at that time?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, absolutely. We like to provide both sides of a war with, and
as they do. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea was this: the legitimizing of it was that they were only supplying Iran with weapons so that this money could be used in order to finance the Contras who were fighting the socialist Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Somehow in all of this, as well as providing them with weapons and stuff like that, the Sandinistas decided very, very kindly to provide tons and tons and tons of cocaine, which went into America. This went through conduits, particularly Danilo Blandon, who was connected to the Nicaraguan government. It went through Panama under CIA asset Manuel Noriega, through the Guadalajara cartel, which was financed and set up by the CIA and at the time was the largest Mexican cartel, and then to people like Ricky Ross, which was then turned into crack and distributed in Ohio, St. Louis and Los Angeles. By strange coincidence, Compton and South Central Los Angeles has also been gentrified in the same way that Harlem has. So now it's actually a very, very pricey place to live.
So just to interrupt, the result of exporting arms to that conflict was to get a whole load of drugs back into the US?
Yes, which just so happened to be turned into crack and sold to specifically black people, which just so happened to coincide with the Republican Southern policy, which was demonising blacks in order to swing votes towards their
right.
party.
All right, let's come on to Danilo Blandon, is it?
Yeah.
Tell us about him.
Well, Danilo Blandon, he was basically initially headed Nicaragua's agricultural imports under Somoza, but in 1979 he fled to the US. He was a CIA asset, but he was basically protected by the CIA when he was funneling money and weapons to the Contras from the profits that were made with Freeway Ricky Ross and the Crips street gang in Los Angeles. And for example, he was arrested in 1986, but by 1982, for drugs peddling, all charges were dropped. He eventually became... He was a naturalised citizen. The INS, despite his criminal conviction, actually gave him an American passport and set him up. He now works for the DEA, for the Drugs Enforcement Agency, on a $42,000 a year job. But he was the guy that was basically, say, the conduit to get the drugs to Freeway Ricky Ross. He was also the person who would phone up and say, move your stash from here, here and here, there's going to be an investigation of that.
Right, and I have heard that happens in London as well.
Oh, no, I don't doubt it.
To the point where they've got the kettle on
for the police,
for the people who are going to raid the place. Right. Okay. All right, Neil. Well, we're going to go for a break, and after the break, we're going to talk about Bill Clinton's alleged involvement in cocaine.